All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast. Mitch Michals here, all part of the Believe Network. We've got a ton of great content on this show and on the entire Believe Network. Inside In Tennis Podcast can be found on all your major platforms as well. Really excited to be joined by my guest. First time on the show, also hosts a podcast on the Believe Network, Serving Aces. She was a Wimbledon semifinalist. She's made quite the name for herself on and off the court. Player, commentator, teacher of the game, podcast host as well. Alexandra Stevenson, I'm delighted. It's an honor. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
Yeah, we're teammates too. I forgot to put that in there. So
Yes.
Talking to a fellow Believe podcast host as well too. So, a lot to get into with your career and where you are now and just thoughts on the current game. But I guess I wanted to start with this. Tennis is in an interesting place, right? And you've seen it in various forms, various generations and iterations. But as we start going into 2025, it does seem like it's an interesting time for the game. It's glowing up a little bit, and it seems like there's quite a bit of a buzz in and around the sport itself.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I've talked about it a lot with Oogie, my co-host on my pod, about like last year. I was like, the women need to step up. Let's get it going. Just obviously there's been the top three with Swiatek, Sabalenka, and then you have Coco Gauff and sometimes Rybakina in there. I mean, it's really four, but the last 6 months, there's kind of been a shift, and there's some more exciting players popping up on the women's side. Obviously, the men's side, it's just been since Federer retirement and Nadal, it's been like a bunch of players that are fun to watch. And you get Taylor Fritz at number 4, you have Ben Shelton, you have Tommy Paul. So the men's have been pretty exciting the last 2 years. And I feel like now the women are coming through. There's a couple more Americans that are making their marks. So I'm excited to see what happens like for the hard court season right now going into the clay.
Yeah, and talking about the depth, right? That was what we were discussing in the women's game. Like there had been some parity, maybe a little too much, some would argue. It's funny, recalling back a couple years ago, someone and we were just talking about Pam Shriver, who you work with to this day. She said every major semi that I made, I had to play a Hall of Famer. That was her era now. So it does seem like it's
totally
trending.
Different. Yeah.
It's different. It does seem like it's trending to where there's some centralized talent, some depth at the top, which is nice. There's a good group of girls now that are proving that they can win a big title.
Yeah, and also it's when you look at it on the women's side, the last 12 years, how many different Grand Slam champions there have been. And like when Pam said she was playing a Hall of Famer, I mean, in my era, it was Lindsay Davenport, Venus, Serena, Steffi Graf in the beginning. I was always up against Mary Pierce or Conchita Martinez. It was just like really tough to break through and to win a tournament. Like they used to make fun of Anna Kournikova for not having won. Well, look who she was playing, Martina Hingis. She was playing, we had really top echelon players. There were about 10 to 15 of them. And the 15 players weren't always winning Grand Slams when I came up. So now it's different. I mean, you have so many women that have won.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even like Kournikova, much maligned for a lot. There, look at the rankings, look at, the consistency there. Yeah, it was tougher to break through. It seems like there's depth on the tours that we're getting back to the older point for that. But I did want to talk about kind of your start with all this, where it all goes back. I just want to know what it was like growing up in La Jolla and San Diego and, finding the game when you did. Interesting time, right? Kid of a certain era, the 80s, it was very active. How was it growing up there, and what was ultimately the thing that pushed you towards tennis?
Well, growing up in San Diego was special because it was the 80s of tennis, and that was a heyday. So it was going off of the late 70s, Connors, Everett era, going really into their golden times. Like that was when McEnroe, Borg, that was like huge. Yannick Noah was a little bit later, but I remember I have a picture on my refrigerator, and it's me and Andre Agassi, and I'm 5 years old or 6, and I'm in a pink bathing suit, and we were down at, I want to say it was I think the Le Meridian in Coronado, and the Davis Cup had come to play. And
Yeah.
my mom she was a sports writer, and she covered tennis when the opportunity arose, especially on the West Coast because I grew up in San Diego. So she was covering the Davis Cup, and she brought me along. And so in the 80s, she worked for World Tennis Magazine. So I got to see the icons of tennis then. And Andre was swimming in the pool. And so I just jumped in and started swimming in the pool with him. And he was so fun because he must have been 19, young, 20
Yeah.
maybe. It was maybe 19, 20. And he was like playing in the pool with me, like just splashing. And so we have a picture, and it's just so funny because then years later, I play on Elton John's AIDS Foundation with him, and I get to know him more.
Yeah.
So just the parallel of where I grew up, what you brought up in La Jolla and San Diego, having the access to tennis. I was around Ponzo Segura, a great coach of the game, Angel Lopez, who's still at the San Diego Tennis and Racket Club. Amazing. He gave me my technique from 3 years old. Skip Redondo, he was also down there. And then later I went to Robert Lansdorp and Pete Fisher up in LA. But from the time I was 3 to 9, I was playing in San Diego 6 days a week.
Yeah, not having to leave it. There's no. First of all, it's funny too, like the jumping in the pool. That's your bold, like your playing style was aggressive, so you're just aggressive.
I just jumped. I'm like Andre, and I mean, I'm 5 or 6. I didn't really know him.
Yeah.
He just looked really fun.
Yeah.
And my mom had been around the U.S. team interviewing them, and so I was like, let's go play in the pool.
Yeah, it's no coincidence, right? Like all these players, your era, a little before, even a little after, they're coming up from the same region of the, not just world, but the state of California. And there's just so much access to coaches. Poncho Segura, you mentioned, worked with so many players. You didn't have to leave. You didn't have to go away. You could stay where you were and get top flight, access.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was lucky that I grew up in the 80s and 90s when Southern California tennis, it was huge. I mean, the junior side of it was Venus and Serena. I mean, Serena didn't really play when she played like one tournament, but Venus, I was in the finals against Venus every weekend before they moved to Florida and Rick Macy. They forgot to put that in the movie, but
Yeah,
I have receipts. I've got pictures. So it was always Venus and me, and Venus was always beating me. And that was not from 9 to 10. And then she moved. But imagine that was the competition. And then you go down and the competition of a high performance junior tennis, hitting hard court tennis, like ripping balls. There was just some great coaches in our area, as in LA, all the way down, and they really knew how to teach technique and serves. And I feel like that's what is kind of lost in translation in today's junior game right now.
It's lost in a lot of ways, and I think you could speak to this too. You can't really make up for that once you get to the pros. Like it's too late. Like,
as we see,
don't have to name names, but
no, it's it definitely was the base of technique from the 80s and 90s players. Something happened along the way with coaching, and obviously grip changes, and then more clay court tennis. And I think with Nadal coming in with his game, I think a lot of coaches look to formulate their way of coaching off of Nadal's game, and the kind of traditional grip got lost. And especially in American tennis, I don't know if that's a good thing. You don't know. I see now there's a lot of forehands that need help.
There's a parallel with other sports too, right? Like I was thinking of this too with not just with your thing, but with the NBA, right? Like Steph Curry comes in, makes a bunch of threes.
Yes.
You talk to people that coach around AU basketball, they say it's not really the best technically sound game.
Well,
just
because
people
they
trying to
lose
shoot.
the strategy. They lose the strategy of like building not building the point, but it's kind of like building the point, right? And instead, all these kids are going for threes instead of like using defense to set up the shot.
Like, there's one Steph Curry, there's one Rafael Nadal, maybe like dial it back. And,
yeah. So that's the 80s and 90s of Southern Cal tennis. There were some amazing coaches, and they're still around. They're just older. I mean, obviously, Robert Lansdorp passed last year, recently. He was kind of the last of the old school Mohicans that just told it like it was. And so that was sad because he's a part of history of tennis.
He really is. Tennis Channel had a nice tribute on him for the people that don't know what he meant to the game and how many champions he helped build up. In your case, Alexandra, were you always considered necessarily like a prodigy? Was your growth, because you mentioned playing Venus a lot, were you always near top of the class? Were you a late bloomer? Because it happened pretty fast. You're playing pro big matches as a teenager, but what was your development like as a player?
Well, that's a great question. So I played my first tournament at 9, and at 8, I went to my first tournament because my mom was covering Venus. So I saw Venus playing, and then I didn't play until 9 years old. And I played the Harper Inc. tournament. Maureen Connolly now has many tournaments around I think they have like a cup thing going for juniors. But back then it was the Maureen Connolly Harper Inc. tournament out of San Diego. And it was a big deal. If you won it, you got this big plate. So I had heard about getting this big plate, and I really wanted a big silver plate. Who wouldn't? So I got to the finals, and I lost to Valerie Ziegenfuss's daughter, who's one of the original 9, and her name was Allison Bradshaw, and she was considered the best in San Diego at 10. She was a year older than me. And I was very upset that I lost. So I guess you could say my first tournament at 9, getting to the finals of the girls' 12s, was a big deal. I wasn't really, I had decided to play tennis. It was swimming or tennis. And I had decided to play tennis. And then I got to the finals. I'm like, okay, this is fun. And I started playing more. But I played up in the 12s. And I think my game didn't really develop to where it got to for the pros until I was like 14, 15, because at 9, I had a 2-hand backhand and I was playing really well with it. And then Pete Sampras won the US Open, and it was 1990. And my mom went and interviewed Pete Fisher, and she said, could you look at my daughter? I think she could get a college scholarship. And so she brought me along, and he took me out on the court, and he said, well, I think she could do better than a college scholarship. I'll coach her. And we lived in San Diego, and he lived in LA. And she's like, what? And he goes, yeah, I'll coach her if you drive up here 3 days a week. And so my mom was like, And he goes, but you have to go to Robert Lansdorp and Del Little for footwork, and Robert Lansdorp for ground strokes. And that's the deal, and I'll coach her. And so my mom was like, okay, this could be interesting. So we started driving to LA 3 days a week. I got my backhand changed like 2 months later, and then I got beat up. So I wasn't,
similar
I wasn't
to Pete,
a prodigy.
Right? Like,
yeah, it was similar.
You made a huge thing. And I was going to ask you too, right? The one-hand backhand, a lost art form in a lot of ways. Still some players out there, but
it's still hanging on.
That's a big move for anyone to make, let alone yourself, who already had experienced success as a kid on the tennis court. But was that, how were you able to take your lumps? I mean, it could be down.
I took a lot of lumps.
It could be, catastrophic for the confidence of some young players. How were you able to just stay the course and stay positive?
I think it was different because now in the tennis age now, there's social media. There's a lot of hype around the tournament, the big tournaments. And I feel like the junior tennis players kind of lose the developmental process of, like, they just want to win now. They want to win everything, and they want to be famous. That's kind of what I think is happening. Not to everybody, but I just see it. And when I got told I was going to change, I just went, okay, well, he knows what he's doing. And he said, I'm going to be tall and I'm going to be strong. And he wanted me to play like a Margaret Court or Martina Navratilova. And I was like, okay, cool. I mean, I had watched Margaret Court on some tape, and I had watched Martina, that I used to get up to watch her win her 9 Wimbledons. And I was like, okay, sure. I just kind of didn't even think about it. Like, okay, I have a coach telling me that is very smart that I'm changing my one hand. Well, Robert had seen me before he changed it. So Robert Lansdorp went nuts and he was like, no, this is ridiculous. And then he came on board because Pete said, it's a one-hander or nothing, or I won't coach you. So then Robert was like, okay, well, if you're going to go with a one hand, then I'm just going to make it the best one hand I can make it. And he didn't say it in those words, but Robert Lansdorp had an amazing one hand and backhand. People don't realize that because a lot of his players, most of them, besides Pete Sampras and myself, had two hands. But Robert's one hand was brilliant.
Yeah.
And so hours of ripping one-handers with Robert built my strength. And it took till I was 13, really. So 10 to 13, I got beat up a lot.
Yeah. Then you hit your stride at 13, 14. It really becomes a strength. When did the tide turn of, okay, it's not looking like college, it's looking like pro. It's looking like I'm going to turn pro, really, while you were still in high school?
Well, I actually wasn't going to turn pro. So the goal was still college. My mom wanted me to get a college education, which I did. I just did it while I was on tour. So I have a Bachelor of Arts from University of Colorado. Shout out Buffs and Deion Sanders. Now we're cool.
Coach Prime, yeah.
Yes. But so at 15, I was 14, really, I started getting recruited. And then 15, I was one of the top recruits for college. And Stella and Rance came down to see me, and like at 16, I think they can't really talk to you. So
Stella
16,
Sampras,
right?
Rance Brown, UCLA.
Sampras, Rance Brown, UCLA. And so then the next year, at 17, I said, okay, I committed to UCLA by word, and I said, okay, unless I get to the semis or win Wimbledon, I will come to UCLA.
Oh.
We had dinner in Pacific Beach. I remember we were at a fish restaurant in Pacific Beach. Rance came down, Stella came down, my mom was there, and I said, okay, I'm not signing anything yet, because the deal with my mom was if I got to the semis or won Wimbledon, I could turn pro. That was the deal. And I was going into qualifying at Wimbledon. And I was doing my senior year play of Greece, and then I was going to graduate, and then I was going to fly to Wimbledon. I gave up the French Open to do my play and graduate.
What role in Greece? Just for everyone out there wondering.
I wanted Frenchie. I didn't get Frenchie because I had to play tennis and I couldn't be there full time. So I was Patty Simcox, the annoying cheerleader. But I didn't care because I loved musicals. So I played her to the best of my abilities. So anyway, I did that, went to my prom, graduated, got on a plane the next day, flew over to Surbiton, England. And I had told, Surbiton is outside of Wimbledon. And I had told Rance and Stella, okay, so I'll let you know how I do. And they're like, okay, we'll see you. We'll see you soon, right? So that was kind of the deal. It was always college first. But the thing is, I didn't have, it's the ITA. No, not the ITA. It's the NIL. There was no NIL in 99, 2000. So it was, they would offer you a full 5-year scholarship plus maybe an apartment or, you know, whatever they could get from their donors. But it wasn't like you could go play pro tennis. That wasn't the deal. They weren't going to help me go out on tour like they do now. It was just different. So it was either college or pros. You had to decide which lane you were going into.
And then Wimbledon happened. Yeah.
Well, yeah, then I met my goal.
Yeah.
So things changed.
I was thinking, too, you were talking that we learn things every day, the musical side of things. I was about, I don't know, like 10, 11, 12. I saw like a school field trip, Robert Goulet in South Pacific. I was like, whoa, musicals. This is crazy. We got more here with Alexandra Stevenson here on the Inside in Tennis podcast, talking about her career, thoughts on the game, and so much more. That Wimbledon run was really, iconic and just shocking in a lot of ways. But I guess starting with that tournament, starting as a qualifier and going through, did you have experience on grass? Did you think your game could match up with it? Like just as the surface starting there, was it something you felt confident playing on?
Well, I liked grass. I had played on it a couple times at Desert of Champions with John Austin, Tracy Austin's brother, and also Wimbledon champion of mixed doubles with Tracy Austin. So John had, so I was lucky. I had Pete and Robert as coaches, but John Austin had come in, Elliot Telcher had come in. So I had some great mentors through just Pete Fisher and the Kramer Club and Tracy Austin. So in the desert, I'd go over there and with the USGA, I'd see Jose Higuera sometimes down there as well. And so I'd played on grass a couple times down there. It was a lot of fun. There was a junior grass court tournament that I won. I won like a tennis clock. And then I won the junior grass court doubles with Tracy Green, who's now the Harvard coach.
So I had experience.
Yeah, I had experience.
A lot of Americans
and I think I got
don't have that.
Second place in singles. Yeah, so I kind of took like, what is it, a duck to water? I took a person to grass court tennis. I loved it. And I had practiced at La Costa for the month before in May. I'd practiced with this guy that I used to hit with, Andrea Bonfili, and he's from Italy, and he didn't love grass as much as me. But we used to go up to La Costa, and they'd let me practice on the grass up there. So I was playing practice sets before I left for Wimbledon. And yeah, I thought I was prepared, and then I got to Surbiton and lost in the first round to Louise Latimer, a British number one, and I was like, what is going on? And so I had to do some work after that tournament, but it is a bit shocking getting off a plane, going into, and Surbiton grass is known to be just kind of random, and there's lots of rain, and you kind of have to get playing on California grass, and grass in the desert is totally different because of the conditions. So English grass was different than the grass I was playing on.
At what point during that run did it really start to become real? And I mean, was it the last match to get to the semi? Was it along the way? Because, now we've seen it a few times in tennis history where qualifiers go on this run.
Well, now Emma Raducanu won. Yeah. So
especially to do it as an American at Wimbledon, like coming from literally out of nowhere on the grand scheme to all of a sudden everybody's talking about you. When did that really become real?
Well, it was a bit different, my run, because I really came out of nowhere. I was literally in high school 2-3 weeks before walking in my graduation outfit. So I wasn't trained to be a professional. So I went in and my goal was to get through qualifying. And I had ended up being one out of the tournament and I didn't know it. So I was the number one seed, and I was one out because Stephanie Graf had won the French Open and decided to not retire yet. She wanted to play Wimbledon. So that pushed me into qualies. So I didn't know, I never looked at draws. So I went in and the goal was to get through qualifying because in Birmingham, the week before, I had pulled my stomach muscle. And I had qualified to the quarters there and had to pull out against Natalie Toziat. I couldn't even serve. So getting me healthy for qualifying was an experience. And I could half serve in the first 2 rounds at qualifying. So that was why the goal was to qualify.
It's crazy.
Nobody knows this stuff.
That's another one where you're just managing an injury through before this run. And
my stomach muscle pulled because I was like out of height. I wasn't. I didn't have a trainer. I wasn't like Emma Raducanu, who was trained by the LTA. I was training with Pete Agoscu, this functional movement, like with running logs and running hills. I wasn't like in a gym. So to play big tennis that I had with my big serve on grass, it's a lot of pulling and my stomach muscle was like, oh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, I was sort of strong, but I wasn't professional tennis player strong. So I had my mom likes alternative stuff. So we had this Russian breather that was taught you how to breathe, and he lived in San Diego and I had worked with him. So I would call him on the phone the week before qualifying and do breath control work. And
Wow.
in 99 people would be like, this is so silly, but now it's been proving that breathing can heal you. I mean, it's like more known now. So I was doing that, and luckily the WTA has amazing physical therapists, so they taped me. So I got to the third round, and I don't think I dropped a set because I just was really focused on holding my serve. And it was at Roehampton, and everybody that's played Roehampton or covered Roehampton up until now, it's a little more elegant.
Yeah.
But maybe 5 years ago, they made the shift and made it better. Before then, it's like cricket grounds with bumpy grass and just like, you just go out there and you play, right?
It's like a free for all. Yeah. You just got to survive and get to the main draw somehow.
So it was all about first serve, first hit. That was the goal. And it worked. And I qualified in.
You get to the main draw, and then it was suddenly like, okay, you build some momentum. The draw is starting to open up for you. Looking at that run, Lisa Raymond beats Conchita. Then you take out Lisa Raymond to get to the quarterfinals. It's Dokic. And all of a sudden, you make it to the second week of a slam as a seemingly unknown. I feel like, and I'm not being around at the time, popularity and really anything that happens at Wimbledon, it's just a glowing effect. Like it nonstop happened literally overnight. Was that how you saw it? That like one day you were just kind of in the background, then all of a sudden everybody knew who you were?
Yes, because it was before social media, right? So now it's changed. Social media's changed the game. Players at like 15 are getting paid, and they're getting brand deals, and they're branded, right?
Did you ever hear the term until recently, like players like as a brand, like they are their own brand?
I'm like, what? Like I'm a brand. Okay, you're a brand. Like you won one round at a match and you have a brand. Okay, good. I mean, but good for them, right?
Good for them. Yeah.
Totally taking advantage of it. So there was no, I was reading newspapers at the breakfast table. That was the source of news. AP, if you were in the AP, that was cool, right? On the AP line, like looking at scores. So the one thing I had, which I was very fortunate, the USTA lent me Craig Carden. And Craig Carden's a legend of coaching. And his background was he started with Martina Navratilova. So he went through a lot of Wimbledons with her. So Craig came in at Surbiton and worked on how to play grass with me for those 3 weeks. So when I qualified in, he took me to Wimbledon and he ran me around all the courts. And he showed me each court so I could visualize it. And my first round was a tough one. It was against Barabanchnikova, and she was an up-and-comer. She was like going to be the new Kornikova. She was pretty good. It was hard-hitting Belarusian. I want to say she was Belarusian. I think she became a pop star. But anyway, she was tough. So that was a tough first round. She had gotten a wild card, or she was in the main draw. I can't really remember. And then I played Amy Frazier, who was top 20, another flat hitting player, struggled through it, got through in 3 sets. But then I played Julie Hillard-Degugy, and that was where I was still unknown because I was like on court 14, which is still a nice court. So I didn't get like a totally bad court, but I was on 14. Julia Hillard, I got to be on court 13, which no longer, it's now one of the grandstands. They've rebuilt it. Anyway, that was Julie Hillard was 8 in the world. So people forget that I beat a top 10 player in the 3rd round. She was a tough player. I had practiced with her the week before because Craig was big on getting me practice sets, which was great because not everybody in 99 2000s would play practice sets. Now you see the women doing it more. It was mostly the men. So I had played her a practice set. I had played Mariana Lucic a practice set, and I had practiced with Anna Kornikova. And so I knew Julie's game, and I was a little, that kind of calmed me down a bit, right?
Yeah.
But it was like exciting. I was in the third round. Frank DeFord was working for HBO Sports at the time.
Yeah.
So he had come over to my mom and just said, well, we're watching, like they're watching ours, but nobody really. Venus was walking around with guards, and I was like behind her getting hit by fans because people had known Venus. Yeah, and I was like hanging out with Venus, and they were like, Venus, Venus. And I was like behind her, and we were going to go hit indoors, and nobody knew who I was. And it was the third round. So that third round, when I took Julie Hillard out in 2 sets, that was where everything changed.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, I had some security guards walking to the practice court, and it still was quiet because it's not like it is now, but the groundskeepers would say hi, or the ball kids, or the tarp players would come to my practice court and take the tarp off. And then the American men would all watch my practices. I had Boris Becker saying like, oh, look, it's going to be baby Boris, because they all kind of thought I could make a run after that. And I didn't really pay attention because I was just in a bubble. But I knew something had shifted after the third round match.
Wow. So that's tremendous insight. It's funny, like you're still locked in to the job there. And I know it didn't, you get all the way to the semifinals. Lindsay Davenport, a tremendous Hall of Fame champion. But when that match ends and when you get time to breathe, is that when it finally sets in like, wow, I was, Wimbledon semifinal. I was nuts.
I was very upset because I wanted to win it. And it didn't even hit me that I got into the semis and then I had like got my goal, because I was devastated because Lindsay was just playing amazing tennis. Yeah. It was her tournament to win. And it was my 9th match. So I was exhausted.
And there was a lot of rain, right? Like
there was a lot of rain. It was hot the first week, and then there was a lot of rain. My quarterfinal against Jelena Dokic went over 2 days. We got rain delayed out. We were on the graveyard court, which is no longer. Now it's still there. It's just not the same. And then we got moved to court 1, which I was very excited about. So I had won the first set. Then Jelena was up 5-1 in the second, and it started pouring again. And we got called off. And then Alan Mills, who was like an iconic referee of English tennis and Wimbledon, he was for many years, came over in his British voice and was like, Miss Stevenson, would you like to move to court 1? And I went, of course. It's a bigger court. Yeah, put me on it.
Yeah.
And Jelena had just eaten a big dinner, and she said, no, I don't want to move. And plus, she was up 5-1. So why would she want to move? She's winning, right? And so she had agents because she was the top Australian, and she had taken out Hingis. So from the first round, she was already being touted as the next wonderkid. So it was a different mentality for her than it was for me. I was like, yeah, let's go. And she was like, no, I'm staying on 2. So they went back, and Alan Mills did his referee thing with whatever. They did their little conclave, and he came back and said, we've decided to move you to court 1. So please get ready and be ready in 30 minutes. So we got ready. We walked out. And I just remember there were these flashes everywhere because it was before iPhones, right? So they had cameras. And I was like, oh, this is so cool, because it was twilight time. And we warmed up and it started pouring. So we went back inside, and Alan Mills came back in and said, we're going to have to postpone until tomorrow. And I said, okay, can we still be on court 1? That's all I cared about.
That's it.
I was like, gotta get to, because I wasn't going to get to center, because as you know now, watching women's tennis, a lot of players get on center court early rounds now. They're more fair. Back in 99, early 2000s, you didn't get on center court as a woman tennis player unless you were top 5.
Yeah.
It was tough.
Different.
So that's why court 1 was such a big deal to me, because I knew it wasn't going to be center, but it was court 1. So we came back the next morning after a Tim Henman match, which was awesome because then it was packed. And I was like, oh, I made it. Like I'm on court one and it's full. And so I was just excited and I was down 5-1 and I just decided to rip everything and be loose. And Craig wanted me to like come back and battle that second set, but I knew I was on grass and you don't come back on grass. You want to serve first in the third set. So I wanted to serve first. And I knew if I served first, I could win that third. So that's what I did. And then it was all the Henman fans. So it was even better.
That youthful exuberance, right? Like no need to overthink it. Just go, being excited to be there and of the opportunity. Well, when it did settle, when it settled down, and it went from, not being relatively known even in your own country to People Magazine, a sit down with Barbara Walters, all these things.
Well, it didn't really settle. It kind of got crazy for a bit.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's a lot for anyone to process, let alone an 18, 19-year-old. But how did you try to process that as best you could?
Well, look, it was tough because I had the other scope of it as somebody bought my birth certificate and like stalked me with it, and then they broke the news and it wasn't anybody's business, and then all of a sudden it was. So I had to deal with that, but I was prepared. My mom was a sports writer for many years, so she had prepared me for when the time was coming. I had done mock press conferences. I learned how to deal with the media, but it was still tough because I was trying. After that, I had a target on my back and I was trying to play tennis and learn how to play professional tennis. Because like I said earlier on, I didn't come in as a mini pro. I came in as like a high school student with a lot of talent who was going to be, go to college and maybe develop later. And then all of a sudden it happened and it was like, okay, now everybody wants to beat you, go play tennis. And then everybody wants to interview you about who your father is. Yeah. So it was, look, I'm tough, but it was still hard. And the media in the early 2000s were not nice. They, it's different now, more politically correctness now. And then being a female and of a color, that was tough. And I didn't really understand all that until later on. I just was like in it and like soldiering through and trying to figure out how to win tennis matches and travel around the world and not get injured.
That's that last part too, because I think that's forgotten or overlooked for a lot of athletes. You still have a job to do, and that's to win a very competitive sport. You're not in full, you can call it crisis management or handling, a press issue. You have to actually keep winning to keep your livelihood going, so you can't stop.
You filmed a movie and then you're doing a press junket, right? Yeah. It's like this is your job. You're getting paid to you have sponsors, you're getting paid to win, and then you have to pay your bills all of a sudden. And like and
those women are not going to take it easy on you.
And then everybody wants to kill you because you made a big splash, and that's like that's jealousy. So you have the women's side in women's sports. Now, women's sports has shifted, and people aren't as Hunger Gamey, but it's still under the radar. I mean, it was like you didn't have a lot of friends out there. So you had to learn how to fight to be on the tour as a young 18-year-old woman, figuring it out in a sea of like chaos and not a lot of empathy.
Right. To a degree, I understand it for an individual sport. Like it's hard to have complete friends when there's one winner every week. And I like that there's more camaraderie now, but when the chips are down,
better.
It's a bit.
Yes,
when the chips are down, it's a competitive game, and you're trying to be the best and beat everybody.
I'm sure if you ask Emma Raducanu if she has a lot of friends, she would tell you no.
Yeah. No, it's tough for anyone to go through what you did, and and I do have a lot we can save for the next time about your career and everything. But being gracious with your time, I wanted to wind things down here on the Inside in Tennis podcast of where the game is now and kind of what we're looking at. Aside from what we said off the top about how tennis is an interesting time where the pecking order is, players making their move. What have you seen in tennis this last couple of years that's different from how it's played on the women's side? How are they playing differently as tennis players than when you were playing 20, 25 years ago?
Okay, great question. So I feel like there's two parts. All right, so there's the movement for certain players has gone up a whole nother level, and the sliding on the court that Kim Clijsters kind of brought into play. I would say Kim coined the slide in my generation. That's now normal. You see that a lot more. And what Iga has brought is how physical she is with her feet and her movement. The serve progression hasn't gone where I'd like it to go with even Sabalenka and Rybakina. Their spots aren't what Lindsay Davenport's spots were, or Serena's, or mine, or Venus, even Venus's. I feel like the serve is something to be worked on the women's side. And also the all court game has kind of, look, I came up in the era big, as Mary Carrillo called it, big babe tennis.
Yeah,
right?
Her words.
Her words, big babe tennis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now everybody can hit hard with the technology and the strings, but the depth and the drive of the force of the ball, it's just different. It's not clean especially on the forehand side. Now you have Sabalenka and Rybakina who can hit through the court. It's just different. Madison Keys, she's clean. She finally made a breakthrough because she does have the serve and the clean ground strokes. But one more thing is the all court game where you can come in off a short slice and volley and make the shot. I don't see that a lot. I'm seeing it a little bit with the college players. I've seen a couple women add that in, and I think that's going to make a difference. But you kind of lost the net in the last 15 years.
I feel like that's, so as you were answering, I was like, yeah, coming into net, that's where this is going to go. And look, you can say the same for the men's game too. It's just,
we've lost it. Now, Sinner's kind of trying to bring it back with his drop shot and coming forward. Yeah. And you have Ben Shelton. But yes.
Sometimes it takes a player like that to be the best, that you have to counterattack them because you don't want them obviously to win all the money. I also wonder too, if you think part of this is related or a separate issue, but how homogenous maybe just the playing surfaces are, that people are able to play the same style.
I think exactly. I was going to say court surfaces have slowed.
Yeah, I was going to say
go ahead.
Wimbledon specifically, when you played to right now, it's like a different sport.
So I struggled so much when they changed the grass, and I needed a couple more years to figure it out, and then I hurt my shoulder, unfortunately. But you saw it. Pete Sampras struggled. Agassi would have struggled. They severely changed the grass so that, I mean, Federer figured it out, but Nadal won Wimbledon because they changed the grass. And no offense to Nadal, it's become more like a hard court, and they've told you they slowed down the rye of the grass for TV. The surfaces, the slow surfaces. When I came back after my shoulder, I had to change my game a little bit and figure out more. I mean, I never did get back where I wanted to, but yes, the game, the surfaces, that has affected it, but you can still learn how to volley and come in. It just takes a little bit more time.
We've got this wide range of players on the women's side too. You have teenagers, Coco Gauff setting the standard obviously now. Mira Andreeva just won Dubai and is on her way as well.
Yes.
You also have what we call like the mom movement. All these mothers are just still doing well too.
Yeah, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
They pop out babies and then come back. And they come back stronger, which is even better. It's like they figured it out. They figure their game out after having a kid. Like having a kid is really hard, right? And then they come back to the court and like, oh, this isn't as hard as having a kid.
Yeah, no, I would take the women's word for it on that one. I will also say too, Belinda Bencic had a quote recently. I know she has done well since she came back. One of several women that has. She said, "Look, now tennis isn't life or death anymore." And I think there's some real, understanding of where tennis fits. These are tremendously hardworking women, want to be the best, put all their time into it on the court to be a great tennis player, but they know there's not the end all be all that maybe they didn't see before they had
I think
a child.
That's so well said that you brought that up. It's so well said by Belinda because she came up as a teenager too. And I feel like the men don't get this as much. They get this a little bit, but on the women's side, the pressure to win at a young age and to succeed is still really difficult, and it hasn't gone away. It's gotten a little better, but I'm sure if you ask, look, Andreeva's quotes after she won the tournament, I want to thank me for believing in myself, and I've been through some hard times. She's been through some tough times. It's going to happen. If you are on the tour as a woman, it is probably the hardest sport to be a professional athlete in because it's individualized and it's just you're a female and you're up against so many different things. And you're also surrounded by a lot of male coaches and male hitters that don't understand the nuances. And that's another thing about Andreeva that I find very interesting is she has her breakthrough and Conchita Martinez is coaching her, who's also gone through amazing times and difficult times. So she can relate to her.
Yeah, having a strong voice in her corner. Andreeva, like we've said too, it wasn't all winning. It was taking her lumps and learning how to adjust to losing
yeah, she
too.
had to build, and she has a temper, and she had to figure it out. And she got in trouble with her temper on the court, and yeah, she was touted as amazing, and then she didn't win, and then I'm sure she got a lot of stuff, just like every tennis player does.
Yeah,
lots of haters love to hate.
They do. It's nice to see though that tennis is crossing over at this point too. You have so much more pop culture, not just movies, references, whether it's Serena at the halftime show or these movies. It's just good to see.
Walking.
Yeah, it's
Did you like it?
I did. I thought, look, anything where tennis is in the mainframe, I think is great for the game.
Yeah,
I think it's
especially for Serena. Like to have that moment after Wimbledon getting in 2012 where they just like dissed her for it. And she's like, I'm just dancing because I'm happy. And then to come on the Super Bowl and do it. And it was like a blink and you miss, but she killed it. Like
tie-in too. It wasn't, there was a reference in that song as well. I just think it's good that whether it's Serena or Federer, whenever, Nadal just retired, Novak will be retiring at some point, we think. It's just good to keep these legends around. Like it
is, yeah.
You don't have to, like it's their choice, but it's nice to have them still involved in the sport or in pop culture, just kind of wearing the badge for tennis.
It's helpful that Anna Wintour loves tennis. So,
Yes.
In Vogue, tennis is always going to be in an issue somewhere. So that's also helpful with the fashion tennis crossover.
Well, I had two last things for you here on the podcast. Alexandra Stevenson, the Inside In Tennis podcast. Great chat with her, discussing a lot of different topics. One being any thoughts as we gear up for Indian Wells, what to expect. I know this tournament means a lot to the tennis world, the fifth major. It's no joke. It's right up there. But especially as a Californian, to see where it's grown in your lifetime, how important it is, and this edition should be the same.
No, I love Indian Wells. I think the first time I went out there, I was 5 years old at Desert of Champions. And that was my first professional tournament at the Grand Hyatt. So I played Sawamatsu, and she called the trainer on me and iced me out. I was up 4-1 and then lost. But Indian Wells they run it perfectly. They offer the players everything. It's a great venue. The courts are slower. They have more sand in them. So that is something all the players have to come in being ready, because it's a different surface than any surface during the year. No, I don't love that they chose the surface for it, but it is what it is because of the desert air. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, especially on the men's side now that Sinner is unfortunately out of tennis until the end of April. There's some room for somebody to make a run on one of the sides of the draw. It'll be fun to watch the Americans like Alex Mickelson, see what he could do out in the desert. I would like Ben Shelton. That'd be great. Like, what if he made a run to the finals? I think that'd be super cool to see. We know Taylor Fritz loves Indian Wells, so that's going to be fun. I think on the women's side, it's kind of wide open. Iga Swiatek she's having issues right now. She's figuring it out. The Ostapenko 5-0 is still mind-boggling to me.
Insane.
It's like, okay, I can kind of understand it, but
there's no precedence of a player that, I don't want to say much better, but that much more accomplished to be that. It's
It's
bizarro. It
crazy.
should be the other
But
way
it
around,
goes
essentially.
back to the
Yeah.
net play. There's no net play there. So it's gonna be if you're gonna play on a hard court against Ostapenko, you got to figure out how to come in so she doesn't beat you up. Okay, I like McCartney Kessler.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's on my because she is the all court game. She can slice. She's not afraid to come in. I've watched her. She won a tournament, Cleveland last year, and then Auckland this year, unseeded. I want to say it was Auckland, and she just beat Coco Gauff. So I think look for her, and yeah, I mean the women's. You could name probably 15 women that could make a run right now.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right?
Yeah, I do think that there's Kessler's a good one because she's coming up. She won Cleveland last year, into the top 50 now. Isn't afraid in these big matches. Has the win over Coco Gauff too.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
she's a big one to watch, and she's 5'9". She's a good height for the game right now. For the surface, she can serve. And like I said, she can come into the net, and she's 25 or 26. Yeah. She's been through, again, college tennis. She's settled in.
Tough, yeah.
She's tough. College tennis is rough. You think challenger are tough. Try playing college tennis. I haven't played it. I've just seen it. So
it's nasty. They might hook a collar too.
Oh yeah. She's like, I'm ready for this tour. Look at her. She's won 2 tournaments already. So she could be interesting. Peyton Stearns as well.
Yeah, I was going to say
her first top 10 win against Zhang.
Yeah. These American women, it's just been the depth is outstanding, right? Like
Navarro.
Yeah.
So there's 3 women that have played college tennis right there. Collins, the original.
Yeah.
She's
not
retiring. So, and she's got a lot of points to defend, winning Miami and Charleston. So that'll be interesting to watch her and see how she does it in New Wells. The surface doesn't really suit her, but you never know.
Never know. Well, Alexandra Stevenson, last thing I have for you too, and I wanted to ask you because you still are involved in the game, you still teach, you still love it. Why is it so important for you to do that, to help the next generation, help people that are young and want to get better at this sport you grew up loving as well?
Well, it's funny because I never wanted to coach. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to go act. Okay, yeah, that's a little harder to do, right? But possible. But I feel like when I'm on the court, it's nice to give back knowledge that sometimes people don't know you have, and to help with the technique of the game today, I think is really important because of what I was taught and the mentors I had, and to pass that on in the tennis game is something that needs to stay and it can't get lost. So I enjoy doing that. I enjoy trying to help kids that, might only play for their high school team or only play for their middle school team, but they want to make that team and they want to be successful there. And it really opened my eyes because when you're on the tour and you're in the professional arena, right? Yeah. It's so small and you don't really think of the outside of tennis and who it affects. And what I've done the past 4.5 years with coaching, I've learned that tennis affects people that may never have aspirations to play in college, right? Definitely not pros, but they love it and it makes them happy. And especially after now what happened with the wildfires, 10 of my students lost their houses and their schools. So the fact that they came back on the court and they told me, well, this is my calm place and this makes me feel like I have a sense of normalcy. You're the only thing that's still here. So that really touched me and made me think okay, maybe I'm doing this for a reason right now, because it makes them like I have this 7-year-old student and I interviewed her because Wilson donated and gave me rackets to give to all the kids that lost equipment, and little Rose. And she said, I asked her what tennis made her feel. And she goes, it makes me feel strong, confident, and amazing. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And she's 7. So that's what it brings to me. I feel like you're giving back knowledge that I've spent years honing, and there's a lot of ups and downs in tennis, and at times it's taken away a lot from me, but it also gives back to me.
That's really powerful stuff. It's nice to know you can make a difference. And, sometimes the post-professional playing career, finding a purpose for a former athlete is tough. It's nice to see that there's purpose there, and really cool. Obviously, just really, really powerful to do that. And Alexandra Stevenson, you've been great on this show. I hope to do this again.
Thanks, Mitch.
Tennis player, teacher now, maybe going to start a musical soon. We'll see. It's never too late for that either. It's never too late for that.
Maybe college coaching next. Dip my toe into that.
Maybe. But
Could
no,
be
this
interesting.
This has been phenomenal. Remember, it's Serving Aces, the podcast that you host. Phenomenal. Make sure you check that out as well. Alexandra, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Mitch, for having me. And you'll have to come on mine now.
Now the pressure's on. Now I have to return serve, as they say.
Yep.
That was Alexandra Stevenson. This is the Inside In Tennis podcast. We're on all your platforms, so just go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Search the show, leave a nice rating or review. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, at Mitch Michals, and check out all the great content like Serving Aces on the Believe Network. We'll be back in a little bit. More tennis to talk about. Indian Wells ramping up. For Alexandra Stevenson, I'm Mitch Michals. Thank you for listening or watching to the Inside In Tennis podcast. We'll talk to you soon.